moment in human history. At the height of the Cold War arms race, one mistake or miscalculation could lead to nuclear annihilation. But in the decades that followed, carefully negotiated arms control agreements enabled us to live in a much safer world. In recent years, however, there has been a serious reason for concern. Russia has backed away from arms control agreements. There are no more inspections. Our only remaining nuclear weapon treaty, New START, expires in 2026. And Russia is reportedly developing a nuclear-capable anti-satellite weapon which would violate the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. Meanwhile, China has been rapidly building up its nuclear arsenal, something we should be talking about with them at the highest level. So this hearing comes at a critical time. Secretary Jenkins, I want to thank you for appearing before us today. I believe we must do everything in our power to avoid getting into another nuclear arms race. I'm pleased with how the Biden administration has been balancing our needs. They have kept the door open to negotiations with our adversaries while bolstering deterrence by working with our allies. They are building up an international consensus to maintain peaceful outer space, and they are modernizing our forces. On land, at sea, and through the air, we need to replace and update our nuclear systems. Given the limits on nuclear material, that means retrofitting our warheads. That is why the Department of Energy's project to restore the production of plutonium pits for the warheads is so important. While these modernization efforts are the key to maintaining our deterrence, we must not give up on arms control. It is true that Russia has backed away from our agreements, but they have not gone over the limits set by our treaties. I've seen the projections saying China could have as many as 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. But we should not be basing our decisions on assumptions about 2030 that may never happen. These projections are what might happen if the United States sits around and doesn't do anything about it. But we should not be passive. That is why our diplomatic efforts are so important. We must communicate to the leadership of Beijing the dangers of the world where the United States and China are locked in an arms race. Because while we have the capability to counter their nuclear buildup, we want to avoid an Indo-Pacific with nuclear weapons posture that looks like the Cold War in Europe. One of the most promising developments I've seen is the Biden administration's cooperation with our allies in the Europe and Indo-Pacific. More closely linked alliances like AUKUS and the Washington Declaration with South Korea are crucial in our effort to counter our adversaries. At the same time, I think we need to clearly communicate that we are ready to sit down and talk. We are ready to talk with Beijing. We're ready to talk with Moscow. We did it at the height of the Cold War. We are able to compartmentalize. Despite the brutal invasion of Ukraine, we should be able to do it now, too. We need to open up the idea that while we might not get legally binding agreements, we need to get political understandings. Agreements can be verified with satellites, agreements that will avoid another arms race, agreements that will continue to keep us safe. So, Madam Ambassador, we have a lot to talk about. And let me first yield to our distinguished ranking member, Senator Risch, for his opening comments.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with some of the things that you've said. I've been asking for this hearing for over a year, and this is a really, really important hearing. Global events right now make this a troubling hearing at a troubling time. Why is this so important? Well, our Foreign Relations Committee prides itself as being the soft power committee, and that we look after national security by using soft power. But soft power only works when it's backed up by hard power, not only hard power, but the best in the world, and also with the situation where our enemies and our friends believe that we will actually use it when it's appropriate to do so. For deterrence to be credible, it must be backed up by capability and political will to follow through on the threat. While we retain the world's strongest military, its effectiveness has declined significantly, first under Obama, now under the Biden administration. Our enemies need to believe that we tell them don't, and they do, that indeed they're going to get fire and brimstone raining down on their head. They don't believe that anymore. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate foundation of deterrence and have kept regional conflicts from becoming global wars. Despite this, the Biden administration has doubled down on the Obama-era talking point of, quote, reducing the role for nuclear weapons in our national security strategy. You don't reduce the role of your ultimate foundation for deterrence. And that's what the thought process is here by these two administrations. In fact, the administration demonstrated its commitment to disarmament by extending the New START treaty with Russia within the first hours of taking office. There was no rigorous policy process to support this decision, just blind faith in arms control when everybody knew that Russia was cheating every day. It was a gift to Russia. In truth, the nuclear landscape of the Cold War no longer exists. Our adversaries have changed their strategies. Russia and China have, and every day are developing new nuclear weapons and increasing their reliance on them. They're willing to cheat on treaties and gain an upper hand. As the chairman noted, the only way we know about this many times is through the use of overhead observance. They don't tell the truth. They lie to us. Despite this fact, the administration continues Obama's policy of begging China to engage in talks about strategic stability. Meanwhile, China ignores our solicitations and is racing to nuclear parity. These misguided policies communicate to our adversaries that we so desperately want arms control that we will surrender our own security. Currently, the U.S. nuclear arsenal is required to maintain parity with Russia under the New START treaty, which Russia violates, and a 2010 security environment when China had fewer than 200 nuclear weapons. U.S. allies are understandably anxious about the explosive growth of Chinese nuclear weapons and their delivery systems, and the likelihood that Russia will rely more, not less, on these weapons. Meanwhile, rogue nations like North Korea and Iran pursue nuclear weapons, and the instability spreading around the world only encourages more proliferation as other countries seek to replace the lost American deterrence and their growing dissatisfaction with reliance on America's commitments. In Asia, extended deterrence is particularly weak. Unlike in Europe, we withdrew all of our nuclear weapons from the region. East Asian allies not only worry about China and Russia, but a North Korea that is on track to field a diverse nuclear arsenal in the hundreds. The U.S. should modify our nuclear forces to reassert deterrence and reassure our allies. Importantly, we should explore options for returning nuclear weapons to the theater for the purpose of assuring our allies. Discussing this should not be a taboo. Our enemies are watching. On the conventional weapons side, we experience the same problems. The administration was right to pursue the idea of AUKUS, but it has proven long on rhetoric and short on results. 3 years after AUKUS was announced, we're still operating under the same defense trade rules that are important for AUKUS from the Cold War. The administration needs to certify our allies, take advantage of the ITAR exemption in the 2024 NDAA, and provide a clear path for expedited cooperation on capabilities not covered by the exemption, like hypersonics and unmanned systems. This is necessary if AUKUS is going to help deter China. In Israel and Gaza, the Biden administration is abandoning Israel as it battles to ensure the lasting defeat of Hamas. The lasting defeat of Hamas is the only way forward. Make no mistake, America's allies and adversaries are watching. They're drawing the conclusions that the U.S. is becoming an unreliable friend. And the Democrats' vendetta against Prime Minister Netanyahu, coupled with this administration's disastrous arms sales policies and executions, is politicizing weapons sales and threatening America's ability to recruit and retain partners and friends. U.S. credibility has been severely eroded by the Biden administration's vacillating support for Israel. This follows similar behavior in supporting Ukraine. The Biden administration's fear of escalation from the beginning led to costly delays in providing critical weapons to Ukraine at crucial moments. This constant dithering showed Russia that the Biden administration was self-deterred, and exploiting this fear of escalation would ensure U.S. inaction. Who knows what lesson Kim Jong-un has learned from our resolve? Even more consequentially, one has to ask what China has learned. It's time to understand the world is different and requires a dramatic shift in thinking about global security. If we don't reestablish deterrence through strength, and resolve, instability will only increase. Mr. Chairman, Chairman McCall and I have written a letter to the administration raising a number of these issues and asking for some answers. I'd like to include that in the record, please.
Without objection, it will be included in the record. The distinguished ranking member, in regards to your points in regards to arms control and deterrence, there was much that I thought we were in agreement. Some of the other points I think we differ, we may differ a little bit on, but we'll have an opportunity to talk about that at the appropriate time. We welcome Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who has served as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security since July 22nd, 2021. As Undersecretary, Ambassador Jenkins leads the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability, the International Security and Nonproliferation Bureau, and the Political Military Affairs Bureau. And as of May 2023, Ambassador Jenkins has led the department's efforts in August implementation. Ambassador Jenkins previously served in the Obama administration as Special Envoy and Coordinator for the Threat Reduction Programs in the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation from July 2009 until January 2017. And during that time, she served as the State Department's lead for all 4 nuclear security summits, as well as U.S. representative to the G7 Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction. Well qualified, and we thank you for your public service. Your statement will be made part of our record. You may proceed as you wish. We ask that you try to summarize in about 5 minutes so that we have time for the committee to engage in a conversation.
Thank you very much. Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Rich, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about the future of arms control and deterrence. We at the State Department, together with our interagency colleagues, work to mitigate international security risks and advances U.S. and allied interests. As the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, I want to emphasize that the global security architecture is under strain. In response to these pressures, the 3 bureaus that I oversee are applying a mix of tools in clear-sighted and innovative ways to uphold strategic stability. One tool is deterrence. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review reaffirms our continuing commitment to a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent for the United States, as well as our allies and partners. But reliance on deterrence alone will not solve the security challenges we face. As the NPR lays out, arms control complements deterrence, and both are essential to strategic stability. My opening testimony will address how the Department of State, particularly the bureaus under my responsibility, is using tools like arms control and risk reduction to preserve strategic stability and secure U.S. and allied interests. I want to begin by providing context. We are witnessing a Russia that continues its war against Ukraine, routinely employs irresponsible nuclear rhetoric, and has violated many of its treaty obligations. At the same time, as has been noted, the People's Republic of China is undertaking a rapid and opaque nuclear weapons buildup. It is pursuing a larger and more diverse nuclear arsenal that calls into question its stated intentions and strategy. Meanwhile, the emergence of new technologies, such as artificial intelligence, simultaneously offers benefits while introducing potential threats. While challenging, the security environment also brings us opportunities to demonstrate U.S. leadership in promoting stability. For decades, through hard work with allies, partners, and adversaries alike, we have developed tools to limit these dangers. First, as it relates to Russia, the United States is working to preserve strategic stability while holding Russia accountable for its irresponsible behavior. This includes its legally invalid purported suspension of the New START Treaty. In an annual treaty implementation report that we provided to this committee in January, the United States found Russia in noncompliance with several of its treaty obligations. In 2023, we adopted proportionate and reversible countermeasures, which are fully consistent with international law, aimed to induce Russia's return to full compliance with the treaty. In 2026, New START, our last remaining bilateral nuclear arms control agreement with Russia, will expire. We have expressed our readiness to work with Moscow on managing nuclear risk and developing a mutually acceptable future arms control framework that advances U.S. and allied interests. After all, no one, including Russia, benefits from an unconstrained security environment. Russia, however, has shown no interest in good faith engagement on these issues. We are under no illusion that the road ahead will be straightforward. After all, managing nuclear competition with Russia has never been an easy task, and today may be the most challenging as it's ever been. Let me turn to the issue of the PRC. In 2023, as noted, China Military Power reports estimate that the PRC possesses more than 500 operational nuclear warheads. It will probably have more than 1,000 by 2030. Beijing's development of a larger, more diverse nuclear arsenal is deeply concerning and raises questions about the trajectory of the PRC's nuclear weapons program. The PRC's expansion also raises the specter that the United States may soon face two expansionary and significantly nuclear-armed peers. As this dynamic evolves, the United States must continue to ensure a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent, as well as a strong and credible extended deterrent, while identifying opportunities to reduce risk and promote transparency and predictability. Last November, a State Department-led interagency delegation met with the PRC on issues related to arms control and proliferation. The meeting enabled a preliminary discussion on potential measures for managing and reducing risks. Unfortunately, as noted, the PRC has declined a follow-on meeting and has not provided a substantive response to risk reduction suggestions we put forward. In the outer space domain, the United States is upholding existing obligations and ensuring responsible international behavior. For almost 60 years, the Outer Space Treaty and its prohibition on the placement of nuclear weapons in outer space have been an important element of the international legal framework. Today, that regime is under threat. The administration assesses that Russia is developing a new satellite carrying a nuclear device. Placement by a state party to the Outer Space Treaty of a nuclear weapon in orbit would not only violate the treaty, but also threaten the vital commercial and national security services that any and all satellites provide to society around the globe. In response to this threat, President Biden has directed a series of actions to respond, including direct engagement with Russia and with countries around the world who have interests at stake. We are applying a similar approach to promoting norms of responsible behavior by working with countries around the world for the use of artificial intelligence in military applications. In February, in close coordination with the Department of Defense, we successfully launched a political declaration of responsible military use of artificial intelligence and autonomy, a major step forward furthering international norms around the responsible, stabilizing, and beneficial use of these technologies. In conclusion, diplomacy lies at the core of all these efforts, deterring our adversaries, curbing the risk of miscalculation and misunderstanding, assuring allies that U.S. extended deterrence is strong and credible, and deepening international norms around the responsible use of emerging technologies. The State Department remains staunchly committed to upholding strategic stability and using the mutually reinforcing tools of arms control and deterrence to safeguard U.S. and allied security. We recognize this is a challenging international security environment, which is precisely why we need these tools and your bipartisan support. I look forward to continuing to work closely with this committee and with your colleagues across Capitol Hill to advance these objectives. Thank you very much.
Well, Madam Ambassador, thank you for your comments, and thank you for being here. I want to start with the comment you made about Russia's language on the potential use of nuclear weapons in regards to its invasion of Ukraine. I want to know how the administration is balancing our concern about that type of language and potential of having a nuclear confrontation versus making it clear that it will not deter our support for Ukraine's right to defend itself and our partnership with Ukraine. So how do you balance those two concerns, their challenge in regards to the use of nuclear weapons versus our commitment to help the people of Ukraine?
Thank you very much for your question, Senator. First, I want to make it very clear that our commitment to Ukraine we're very committed to it. It's ironclad, as you've seen from all of the efforts that we have gone through in terms of providing them with the equipment that they need, and our continuing efforts do that until they have achieved their goals and success. So that is actually an important question that you asked, because very often, and what we've seen in forums, is that Russia has used our commitment to Ukraine to be a way in which they have not been as cooperative as they need to be. We continue to inform them about the importance of the New START Treaty, the irresponsible rhetoric that they use, how that does not promote international security, in fact, does quite the opposite. and why they need to come back to the table to continue to implement New START treaty completely, and to also come back to the table so we can start discussing what happens after the treaty ends in 2026. So that's how we balance it. Our commitment to Ukraine will continue, but we also want to engage and make sure that Russia stops its nuclear rhetoric, but also comes back to the table.
There are other nuclear powers that are out there that are just as concerned as the United States should be as to the language used by Mr. Putin. Have we engaged PRC or India or other countries that would have a strong interest to make sure that nuclear weapons are not used in Ukraine?
Yes, we have. This is a topic that I often bring up in my bilateral discussions, which are many, whether it's at NATO, whether it's in my conversations that I have with the PRC. I would also want to highlight that, in fact, quite a few countries are very supportive of our engagement with Russia to get back to the table to discuss what will happen after 2026 and to make sure that we fully implement the New START treaty, because they are very concerned about Russian nuclear rhetoric. They are very concerned about the possibility of us not having an arms control treaty, because they see it very much in the global security interests, despite what's happening in Ukraine. So we have quite a bit of support for what we're doing from the international community, despite our anger at Russia, which is valid. But we continue to have these conversations because all countries are concerned about it.
So Russia has suspended its participation in New START, but as we understand it, they are living up to the limits that were established by the treaty. Is there room here for a political agreement between the United States and Russia in regards to moving forward with some understanding on nuclear proliferation?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, Russia is committed to, at least they've said that they're going to be committed to the treaty limits, which they are, which you assess that they continue to be, and we do also going to staying within the limits as well. So that is something that we are committed to as long as this treaty, as long as they are. But we are also having interagency discussions. One of my bureaus is actually leading an interagency discussion to think about what's going to happen if, in fact, we are not able to get back to the table by 2026 and what that will look like. So we are considering that. We're thinking about that. But at the same time, between now and then, February 2026, we want to continue our efforts to try to bring them back to the table.
So I know there's been some conversations between the United States and PRC in regards to nuclear nonproliferation. Can you just give us the status quickly as to how those discussions are taking place and whether you expect other continued high-level conversations with PRC in regards to nuclear proliferation?
Thank you for the question. Yes, as I mentioned, we did have our dialogue with them in November of last year, and it was an opportunity to highlight some of our concerns, some of the things that we feel responsible nuclear weapon states should do, which is to have these kind of conversations, bilateral discussions, to try to get rid of any misperceptions and reduce the chance of misperceptions about why they're building up their nuclear weapons. We provided them a paper that we think highlights some of the areas that we can do in terms of crisis management and risk reduction, the ways we can continue to work together. To date, we have not received a response from the PRC on that, but our goal is to continue to try to see if we can bring them to the table.
Are there any future meetings set at this stage?
There's no meeting set right now for the PRC.
Are you anticipating that there will be that opportunity for more meetings?
We are, as I said, we are always hoping that we will have those meetings. We make it very clear when I have bilateral opportunities to discuss issues with them, or we let them know our goal is to have a sustained discussion on the issues of their developing of nuclear weapons, the things we're concerned about that are in our national security interests, and why it's in their interest to also have these discussions to bring some more transparency and openness to what they're doing in terms of building up their nuclear weapons.
But if I understand you, we're waiting for China to respond?
At this point, yes, we've made it very clear. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, also in his speech last year, made it very clear we're ready to talk.
Senator Risch.
I'm sitting here in shock, actually. Ma'am, let me give you a message from our allies that you apparently aren't listening to. You think, you actually sit here and are willing to tell this committee you think the Russians are going to return to the table to negotiate on the New START treaty? Is that what you're telling this committee?
Thank you for your question.
You don't have to thank me for the question, just answer it.
We put it this way, we want them to come back to the table and we make it.
I hear that. Do you think they're going to come back to the table? Ma'am, you're living in La La Land. They are not coming back to the table. They invaded Ukraine. They hate us. They fight us at every turn. They are not coming back to the table. The only way they'd come back to the table if they think they can snooker us again, enter into such a treaty, and then violate it and cheat on it like they did throughout the history of START and New START. You actually think you're going to get them back to the table to get a bona fide agreement with Russia? Is that what you're telling this committee?
Once again, I'm saying that is our goal is to try to get them back to the table.
That wasn't a question. Question was not what your goal is. The question is, do you, sitting here as the expert and as the person in charge of this for the United States of America, Moscow's listening to you right now, do you think they're going to come back to the table?
Well, if we go by, all I can go by is what we've done in the past. And in the past, they have come to the table. And some of the times it was very challenging. Even during the Cold War, we had conversations. We were able to talk.
So as the expert, how long do you think it's going to take for them to sit around and say, I guess we'll go back to the table and talk to our friends in the United States? How long till that happens, do you think?
I honestly cannot give you an estimate exactly how long it's going to take them because I don't know. All I
I
say
can.
is I really want to.
It's going to be never. You guys are dreaming over there if this is what you're waiting for. The next thing you answered the question to the chairman on is you're waiting for a response from the Chinese to talk some more about nuclear weapons control. Is that your response?
We provided them with some papers, and we've had some conversations, and yes, it's the ball's in their court right now.
Yeah. How long have you been waiting?
We provided them the paper in November.
Heard anything since November?
No, we haven't heard anything.
Not surprising. When do you think you're going to hear from them?
Once again, Senator, I cannot predict when we will hear from them. I can only say that as a responsible nuclear weapons state, we need to keep making this effort. And in fact, to the international community wants to see us have these conversations because they're very concerned about the situation. And I can tell you that in conversations that I've had with our partners and allies.
Yeah. We're all full of hope, but unfortunately, the history that we've had with these two countries is very, very discouraging. Let me ask you what, as far as the Chinese are concerned, I assume, let's not get into classified stuff. You see the same classified stuff I do, but just open source reporting. Are you encouraged by what China is doing and the developments of not only its nuclear weapons, but just as importantly, if not more importantly, the nuclear delivery systems for those weapons, such as underwater, such as supersonic? You've seen these things in the media, have you not?
Yes, I have.
Is this encouraging to you?
I wouldn't say the word encouraging. I'd say concerned.
I think we're concerned.
Yes.
Is that an indication to you that they're planning on coming to the table and talking to you about these kinds of things?
As I said, when we go to the table with the Chinese and the PRC, one of our efforts is to try to get us to the table so we can talk about some of these issues.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just conclude by saying I'm really disappointed in what I've heard today. These people are sitting around waiting for these things to happen, and it's dream world they're living in. It's La La Land. It's ludicrous. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call on Senator Murphy, let me say I share your frustration about Russia and PRC, but we are all citizens of the world, and we all have to do everything we can to encourage communication among nuclear power states so that we have reasonable guardrails in place, including treaties, I hope, and we should never stop an opportunity for conversations to make the world a little bit safer. Senator Murphy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate those comments. Listen, we don't have any choice but to have a policy in which we hope to be able to create the foundation for positive engagement with countries with nuclear programs. That may not be realistic in the short term, but it would be foolhardy in a nuclear age to abandon that prospect. So I understand it's a difficult dialogue because this is a very dire moment, but it is incredibly important for us to understand that whether it be in the medium term or the long term, that dialogue is still very, very important, even with our adversaries. Madam Secretary, I wanted to talk to you about the future of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. In particular, I want to talk to you about the demands reported in the press that Saudi Arabia has made of the United States. What they have told us is that if there's to be a normalization deal with Israel that we all root for, they would want as a key tenet of that deal the ability to develop a civilian nuclear program inside Saudi Arabia. A number of us have written to the administration to make clear that we believe any agreement would impose and involve what we call the gold standard, 123 agreement, and the additional protocol. Nonetheless, Saudi officials have insisted that a deal must include the U.S. construction of a uranium enrichment facility inside its territory. So let me ask you this. Would the construction of an enrichment facility inside Saudi Arabia, as currently stipulated and requested by Saudi officials as an element of a potential normalization deal with Israel, be detrimental to our non-proliferation objectives in the region?
Yes, thank you for the question. And just very briefly on the previous one, one thing I also want to make clear that while we are also doing our job to make sure that there's diplomatic engagement, we also have a whole of government approach, which is also the deterrence side, which I'm not going to necessarily go into, but we keep track of all these things of both diplomacy and deterrence, two sides of the same coin. Thank you very much for your question, Senator Murphy. We have had discussions with Saudi Arabia for many years, actually for several years, in terms of a 123 agreement. Something that we've been engaged with them off and on. And of course, finding ways that we can promote stability in the Middle East, relationship with Israel and other countries in the Middle East is very paramount to us. So we continue to have conversations with Saudi Arabia on this issue. Unfortunately, I can't get into all the details about the discussions of what's happening on that issue, but I can say that we continue to have these conversations with them on a potential 123 agreement.
Well, let me ask you the question this way then. If Saudi Arabia were to have the ability to do domestic enrichment, what would be the impact of that decision in the context of a normalization agreement on other allies in the region? I mean, it stands to reason that if Saudi Arabia does not have the gold standard applied and they are able to do domestic enrichment, then the UAE will want that ability, Qatar will want that ability, and it will impact Iran's decision-making as well. Isn't there clearly a ripple effect in the region if we do not require the application of the gold standard in an agreement with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, what I can say, and there's not much I can go into in detail, but what I can say is when we are in these conversations that we have, we do look at the regional context. And we do look at, as we do in all these situations, look at decisions that we make and how it can be affected within the regions and how other countries will interpret it. So I can say that. I can't really go into any more detail than that, unfortunately.
Well, but I mean, isn't it just common sense? I mean, you can't say on the record that if Saudi Arabia has the ability to domestically enrich, that would impact the desire of other countries in the region to be able to domestically enrich. They're just not. They're not just going to stand down and allow for Saudi Arabia to have a deal with the United States that they don't have. Yeah,
I mean, what I can say, as you're saying, is that's certainly something that we are considering and we're thinking about in terms of what we're working on with Saudi Arabia and how any decisions that we make with them will impact to other countries in the region and how they're looking at the situation.
Have you seen any evidence that Saudi Arabia is taking steps towards developing enrichment capabilities outside of an agreement with the United States?
I'll have to get back to you on that because I'm not aware of any, but I can't say that that's not the case.
Okay. I think it would be more constructive for us to have a bit more of an open conversation about this incredibly vital issue. I mean, I think you are punting the discussion around the details, but everybody knows this discussion is happening between the United States and Saudi Arabia about a potential major new enrichment capability for the Saudis. I don't think it's helpful to not be able to have an open, non-classified debate about that inside of this committee. And I hope this committee will continue to pursue that dialogue with the administration. I don't think it's helpful to withhold any level of detail about those conversations, which are very real and active. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I understand, and I will certainly take that back. Yes.
And if we need to be in a skiff, we'll have those
Yes.
conversations in a skiff. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say I agree with Senator Murphy and the comments that he just made. I think we ought to get answers to these questions. I think these are legitimate questions to be answered, and the administration ought to answer the questions. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to Senator Murphy as well. I wanted to talk about cutting off arms to Israel. Israel is one of our nation's closest allies. On October 7th, Hamas brutally murdered men, women, and children in Israel. I've seen the videos. American citizens were among the individuals killed, injured, kidnapped, still held hostage. The death and destruction of these terrorists is shocking. Hamas continues to hide in populated areas. Hamas continues to use civilians as human shields. With the serious threats in the region, I think it's more important than ever for Israel to quickly receive everything it needs to defend itself, to eliminate Hamas. Yet the Biden administration is doing the complete opposite at this point. Last week, President Biden announced he was cutting off shipments of ammunition and weapons to Israel. I want to be clear, this is happening while one of our strongest allies in the Middle East is at war with terrorists, murderers. The people of Israel deserve a partner and a friend that it can trust, not one that leaves in the face of terrorism and terrorists alone. The administration should be ashamed, I believe, of its actions. These are the weapons Israel needs to defeat Hamas, to defend its people against additional attacks from Iran and from its proxies. Last week, 48 U.S. senators introduced a resolution condemning the decision by the Biden administration. We must be taking every step possible to expedite the delivery of these important weapons.
Senator will suspend.
Killing innocent children, mothers, families, genocide in Palestine.
Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, the people of Israel deserve a partner and a friend that it can trust, not one that leaves it to face terrorists alone. I think that the administration should be ashamed of its actions, and there are weapons Israel needs to defeat Hamas and defend its people against additional attacks from Iran and its proxies. So last week, 48 U.S. senators introduced a resolution condemning the decision by the Biden administration. I think we must be taking every step possible to expedite the delivery of these important weapons, not putting up new barriers and obstacles in the way. So do you support the U.S. blocking weapons from going to Israel?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Just want to say from the very beginning that our support to Israel is ironclad. And this administration has shown its strong support in very many ways, including President Biden being the first president to be in Israel during a wartime situation, all the support that we have provided to Israel at the UN, thanks to the bipartisan support for the appropriations that we were able to, and you were able to provide for us to continue to give weapons to Israel. And of course, we are very concerned about the loss of life by Hamas and what they've done in Israel, but also by the loss of life by the Palestinians who are also caught up in this war. And as you may know, there have been conversations that President Biden has had with Israel about the situation in Rafah and the concern that we have just about the particular bombs that were going to go there, the 2,000-pound bombs that we had already notified, and we had informed Israel that going into Rafah could result in us not providing some weapons to them. Today, as you probably know, we have put in review $1 billion worth of equipment to go to Israel. That was a pause. We are still considering the situation there, and we continue to work with Israel and have conversations with them on these issues on a regular basis. But I just want to highlight that we will continue to provide Israel with all of the funding that you have provided us in the supplemental. And as I noted, we have provided them today with so tiered with the $1 billion.
And my concerns are that there are other countries looking in on this as well. And if they say, well, how can we expect us to be good partners with them if at this time we're withholding weapons? So the question is, given recent reports of the administration asking for approval from Congress for a new arms shipment, why is the administration holding up weapons now? This is something that was just approved.
As I said, thank you again. As I said, that these are specific weapons that we have concerns about. The loss of civilians that could be used if these bombs are used. But as I said, we are continuing to provide Israel with arms. We will make sure they get all the arms that you've been appropriating to us, and we will continue to do that.
One more question, but my follow-up to that would be that some of these bombs are to get to the fact that these tunnels are so far underground, and that's used as a hiding place by the Hamas, and we've seen that, and I think there's been a surprise to many that how the extent of the tunnels and the depth of the tunnels, and that the attention of some of these armaments are to get to specifically to that. But I just want to ask a quick question on China. So during your confirmation process, you committed to me in writing that you would work with U.S. allies and partners to urge Beijing to engage meaningfully with the United States on arms control. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review said China has embarked on an ambitious expansion, modernization, diversification of its nuclear forces, of which you're well aware. Went on to say that by China expanding its nuclear options, it could allow for them to include nuclear coercion, limited nuclear first use in their employment strategy. Can you share with the committee how many engagements you actually have had with the Chinese officials specifically on their nuclear weapons ambitions and expansion?
Thanks for your question. I can go back and think about the exact times. We had the official engagement in November. I've met with individuals several times on the margins of other meetings that I've been to. Same with other colleagues in my bureaus. So we've had conversations. What we're looking for is a sustained dialogue that we can count on a regular basis. That's what we're really looking for.
It sounds like we're not having that at this point.
Excuse me?
It sounds like that's not going on
That's
at this point. Based on their decisions, probably not your
Right, it's
decision.
not happening at this point, but we need to keep trying to make it happen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Undersecretary Jenkins. And I had not planned to ask you about the situation in Israel and Gaza, but just a few points since it was just raised. As you indicated, President Biden has from the very beginning made clear that the United States stands with Israel in its own defense and has been there throughout this period of time. The president has also raised concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Over 2 million people there who have nothing to do with Hamas, under enormous stress and humanitarian challenges, including starvation. And the president's also made clear that he believes an invasion of Rafah would be counterproductive, that it would not advance the priority of returning hostages safely, that it would worsen an already terrible humanitarian crisis, and that it would cause very high levels of civilian casualties. So I was pleased to see the president's decision to say that we are not going to provide 2,000-pound bombs and other munitions that could lead to those bad outcomes. And you would hope that the Netanyahu government, recognizing the strong support the president has showed for Israel, would be more willing to listen to a partner. And the reality is this committee establishes requirements for U.S. military assistance in many cases with our partners. And that makes sense because American support should not take the form of a blank check. Let me now turn to the issues that I plan to focus on with respect to nuclear arms control. As you know, the 2022 Nuclear Posture Review opposes a no first use policy. In fact, it says that no first use, quote, would result in unacceptable risk, unquote. I disagree with that statement. The president, when he was a candidate for office, supported a no first use policy. And as you know, we've been trying to engage China in discussions with respect to nuclear weapons. And in November of 2023, in February of this year, China indicated that it may be open to negotiating a no first use treaty with nuclear weapon states. Could you just speak to the pros and cons of pursuing that kind of opening from China?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we were made aware of this proposal by the PRC, and this was really the first time we had heard that from them. And I can say again, this is why it's important to have these kind of discussions with them, because then we can talk about what they mean by this no first use. Our questions are, quite frankly, how does an idea for no first use really fit within their ongoing process of building up nuclear weapons? And how sincere are they to this policy that they're saying? As you noted, we don't have a no first use policy at this point. And of course, we have our policy of not using weapons first on countries who abide by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the proposal was one that we hadn't had a conversation with them about. We didn't know about, and so we just have questions. We have questions about it when we're looking at what they're actually doing in terms of building up their nuclear arsenal and building up their military capabilities.
Madam Undersecretary, just to be clear, so you haven't ruled out the idea of discussing with China the possibility of a mutual no first use policy as part of an overall negotiation with respect to nuclear weapons?
What I'll say is we stand by what we put into the NPR, so we're not changing that right now. So just want to make that very clear. And what I'm saying is that we had not heard anything about this, so we would have to take it back, think about it within the interagency. But we are not at this point entertaining the idea, and we're not changing our policy right now.
Well, I hope you'll at least enter into more of a dialogue with China. I mean, as you've said, as others have said, it's been disappointing that they've refused to engage when it comes to nuclear arms control discussions. This seems to be at least an opening for greater discussion if the United States were willing to pursue it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple times here you used the term that our commitment to Israel was ironclad. And is that the words you're told to use by the administration? Because everybody uses it. Our commitment is ironclad. That's what they're telling you?
I think it's a term, yes, and it's a term I believe
good.
is very
I want to ask you about
easily
that.
understood. Yes.
Well, not so much. As I understand it, it's ironclad as long as they do what we tell them to do. Is that a fair statement?
It's ironclad in the fact that we are committed to providing them what they need to achieve their goals and achieve our goals.
And as long as they do what we tell them to do, right? Because we've told them not to do this and not to do that. They disagreed with us, and so we've said, you can't have this and you can't have that. That sounds more like it's wrapped in tinfoil than iron to me.
It's part of conversations. I mean, we are talking with them on a regular basis. They were well aware of our concerns.
I'm not talking about the talking. I'm talking about our commitment. What is our commitment to them?
Our commitment is billions of dollars that we've been giving to them for their defense. Our commitment is supporting them at the UN. Our commitment is working with you in a bipartisan basis to get the funding.
Do we support them in their ambition to eliminate Hamas?
Yes.
You do. We do.
Yes.
And they can use the weapons that we give them to do that.
Yes, they can.
But we've cut off weapons.
We have delayed very big bombs, 2,000-pound bombs.
Is that all we've delayed?
That's what we've delayed.
Okay. Now, you understand, on that sale that you're talking about, I signed off on that. Senator Cardin signed off on that. Our allies across the way, both the chairman and ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee signed off on that. Is it your position that the administration can overrule what we did and not give them the weapons that we've signed off to give them?
We are very appreciative of your signing off on the weapons, but I think there's
Well, if you're so appreciative, why didn't you just give it to them then?
because there's other considerations that we talked about with them that we have to also think about, which is 1.4 million
And
people.
so your considerations overrule our considerations. Is
That's
that
not what
you're
I'm saying. That's not what I'm
Well,
saying.
then, what's going on here? How come you don't do what we signed off on having done?
We appreciate that you provided us and signed off on the weapons.
We
but
don't care about
also-
the appreciation.
But we also
We
have.
want you to do
but we
what we
also-
told you to do.
But we also have conversations with Israel on a regular basis about what's happening and how we can all make sure that they are achieving what they need to achieve, but not in a way that in this
Do you
case.
think you're in a better position to determine what they need to achieve than they are in a position to determine what to achieve?
But we're not, that's not what I'm saying, Senator.
Yeah, I'm not getting anywhere with
Yeah.
it. So maybe Senator Shaheen will be.
Before recognizing Senator Shaheen, let me try just to explain the relationship we have between the executive and legislative branch in regards to arms sales, but we don't have enough time for me to go through the whole explanation here. It is a consultation process. There's also, of course, an appropriation process of funds that Senator Shaheen is very familiar with as a member of the Appropriations Committee. It's an informal process, and then there's a formal process. So I appreciate the frustration of the ranking member, but I can assure you that it's more conversational than just yes or no, and there are nuances always in these arms sales. I have worked with many administrations. I've never agreed with every decision made by any administration since I've been in the United States Senate on every issue, but I must tell you the Biden administration has been very open in its communications with us, and I think respects greatly the legislative branch of government, and I just really want that on the record because it's been a cooperative effort in regards to these issues, and they have certainly shared a lot of information with us.
Mr. Chairman,
Certainly.
so I can put on the record also, apparently you were consulted on this. I wasn't consulted that they were going to withhold arms. I thought you said this was a consultative process and you were consulted.
I'm saying the informal process and the formal process is a consult. The administration makes decisions. They reserve the right as to how to make their decisions and how to notify us. But it has certainly been a very open process. I would say more open process with this administration than I've had with previous administrations, whether it's Democrat or Republican administrations. It's been a more open process.
Well, back to this particular sale, we all consulted, as you said, and we all agreed we would give them X amount. And now apparently they're going a different direction. But nobody came back to me and said, well, you know, we had those consultations, we've changed our mind. Nobody has said anything to me. I turned on a TV set and there it is that somebody's made a decision that countermands the agreement that we made. That's the thing that really troubles me on this, aside from the fact that they're actually doing it.
I'm not so sure we've made that definitive a decision on the delivery dates of military equipment that is clear as you're stating it. There is, as said, actions taken by the Biden administration that I've disagreed with, but I think as far as working with the Congress, they have been very open. Senator Shaheen.
Good morning, Ambassador Jenkins. Thank you for being here. I'm concerned about how China views Russia's nuclear posturing and whether they are looking with favor on Russia's suggesting that they are going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine and their movement of nuclear weapons to Belarus. Can you speak to your understanding of how they view what Russia is doing, and then whether there are ways that we can capitalize on any disagreements that might exist between China and Russia on this issue?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. It's hard to know exactly what China, specifically what they view about the nuclear rhetoric that Russia has been throwing around, mainly because a lack of constant conversations that we have with them. Maybe I can share. Maybe the intel community may have more specifics on that. But one of the things that we do make clear whenever we have conversations with the PRC is that, we make it very clear that we all want to be responsible nuclear weapon states, and what Russia is doing is not being a responsible nuclear weapon state. It's not adhering to the tenets of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It's problematic. It's going against the norm. We make this very clear to the Chinese as well, in all the conversations we have with them, so that we have to make it very clear that there are certain things that states with nuclear weapons need to do, and what Russia's doing is not one of them. And we want to be, at least the U.S. wants to continue to be a responsible nuclear weapon state, which is why we make all the efforts that we do to have these conversations with them, to show the international community that we are doing the right thing for ourselves, for our partners and allies, and quite frankly, for the whole global community of nuclear weapons concerns.
So last month, I traveled to Seoul, and we had a chance to meet with President Yoon. And one of the things he talked about was the extended deterrence that the U.S. has provided to our allies in the Indo-Pacific. And I'm also encouraged by U.S. and NATO partners' cooperation on nuclear technology with our Indo-Pacific allies, the AUKUS agreement, for example. So can you talk about what the administration plans are to bring together our allies, both those in NATO and those in the Indo-Pacific, so that we can closely coordinate and work together on these issues?
Yes, you mentioned, of course, the Republic of Korea, and we had our Washington summits last year, and we solidified with the South Koreans our commitment to them under extended deterrence. We set up the Joint Consultative Group, and we also have another group that I lead called the EDSCG, where we meet with the Koreans on a regular basis. So we wanted to strengthen extended deterrence. We wanted to remind the South Korean public of our commitment to South Korea. We know that they have the DPRK in the background that's shooting off ballistic missiles. So we want to make sure that they understand that our commitment is certainly there. We've also had a number of things like having a ballistic, we had a B-52 landing there. We had a nuclear sub as well. So we're doing these things to make sure that they understand our commitment to them, as well as with Japan and Australia. AUKUS, of course, is a great collaboration between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia, as you mentioned. And then at NATO, there are a number of conversations that I'm engaged in, that some of our colleagues from the Department of Defense are engaged in on a regular basis with them on these issues of nuclear weapons and deterrence, and making sure that everyone we're working with, whether in Northeast Asia or Australia or in NATO, see our commitment to all of this. So this is a regular, I just want to highlight, these are regular conversations we have. We have, doing TTX exercise, all kinds of things that we're doing with them.
So to go back to Russia, one of the things that I think people were very concerned about was hearing that Russia has ambitions to put a nuclear weapon in space. Can you talk about what diplomatic efforts are underway to try and counter that, and how we've responded to Russia?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, the possibility of a satellite that has a nuclear device in orbit by Russia is a great concern. It's a violation of the Outer Space Treaty. It's putting up in space something that could be catastrophic to other satellites there. We saw what happened a few years ago when Russia had a satellite missile test, and how all the debris is still up there. We had to move our International Space Station a couple times because of it. So outer space is an area that we do not want to have these type of nuclear devices or anything up there. So we, as you know, probably we got together with Japan and proposed a UN Security Council resolution that had 65 co-sponsors. 13 of the 15 countries voted in favor of it. Russia did not, of course, and China abstained. Right after that, we had a meeting at the General Assembly at the UN because of Russia's veto, where countries had an opportunity to talk to Russia about this and express their concerns about this. We also had conversations with Russia itself and with China and India individually on this issue. And our main goal now, as we continue to think diplomatically how we deal with this, is to work with countries to encourage Russia not to do this. And we will continue to work with international multilateral forums, and working with other countries. We're also continuing our work on norms developments, responsible behavior, and space activities that we've started already.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Young, first of all, thank you for your leadership on AI. I read your document. It gives us a challenge moving forward and a lot of work for our committees, but good work.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'm looking forward to the international dimension of that work here on this committee. And in light of your very appropriate lead-in, I'll be asking a question of our witness about AI. So I appreciate that. Undersecretary Jenkins, the ADS Bureau at the State Department recently hosted 60 countries for a plenary session on the Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of Artificial Intelligence and Autonomy. What are the biggest challenges to implementing this declaration?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for highlighting the good work that's being done on that. One of the things that's, just talk about some of the positives that's been really good is that, as you said, we're able to get over 160 countries who are actually at the event. It's the first time we've had a chance to really think about how we implement this. And the goal, of course, is to get as many countries as possible to join us in this way of trying to develop responsible norms and responsible behavior in terms of AI in the military. One of the biggest challenges, I guess, in most of these things that we're dealing with today is making sure that we can get as many countries as possible on it and joining it. One thing I can say is that the event last year that was hosted by the Netherlands and the ROK, called the REAIM Conference in February, where I announced it, the PRC didn't make the statement that we need to be concerned and make sure that there's not any misperceptions as a result of AI in the military. So hopefully we can continue, maybe have the PRC join that, but of course we want to get as many countries as possible to join it. So.
In the event there are any uninitiated folks who are following these proceedings, if we could get the PRC to join this declaration, then that would embed what we believe are the appropriate standards into AI technologies that they develop and presumably would like to sell into the markets of the United States, many of our allies and partners and other signatories. Embedding those values, like privacy, openness, transparency, consumer protection into systems is a quite powerful thing for us to do, geopolitically speaking. You indicate the challenge, however, moving forward is to get more to sign on, including the PRC. It's been signed by over 50 countries, which is notable and important, but notably absent are our strategic competitors and potential adversaries, certainly China among those. Do you believe this puts us and our allies at any sort of disadvantage relative to non-signatories, either in the short or long term?
We're in the early stages, and I just want to highlight that we continue to have conversations with countries around the world to join this. At this point, not necessarily a disadvantage. We think right now many countries are thinking about how they will integrate AI into the military. We think as being responsible leadership that the U.S. has on this and continues to need to have in these issues of international security, that we should be leading this work and trying to bring as many countries as possible onto this from around the world to make sure it's seen as something that all countries in different regions want to join. So we feel that that's the real focus for us right now, is to get more countries on, as many as possible.
Excuse me, it sounds like you don't see a substantial disadvantage to our country compared to those who choose not to sign on because it could give them more flexibility. Maybe you see it the way I do, which is overall this effort brings great advantage to our country because it aligns other countries with our own value system, and that makes us stronger, even though there is obviously more flexibility for countries like the CCP who don't sign on to develop standards in any way they like.
Particularly in these new areas
Yes.
of emerging technology. It's important to bring as many countries as possible on these responsible behavior norms. It's really, we think, in everyone's national security to be a part of these things. So,
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to this continued dialogue. Perhaps not enough time for me to dive into Israel security assistance, so I will submit a question for the record that you can respond to. Thank you.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Jenkins. I think Senator Shaheen may have raised AUKUS, but I really want to focus on that. I'm the chairman of the Sea Power Subcommittee on Armed Services and the America Subcommittee here, but because of the kind of overlapping defense diplomacy aspect of the AUKUS framework, I've been very involved in it. And I want to ask you about a recent action. On May 1, the State Department published a set of proposed rules creating ITAR exemptions for the defense, trade, and cooperation necessary to fulfill the AUKUS partnership. Talk us through kind of the high points of this State Department proposal and how you believe they'll foster a closer alignment of the industrial bases of the three nations.
Thank you, Senator. There's so much to say on that. I'm not sure where to start. As a result of AUKUS, one of the things that's going to be very important for us to do because of the interoperability nature of what we're trying to do with Australia and the UK, with the U.S., is to be able, in what we call Pillar 2, which is what we're focusing on and extended on our emerging technology side of AUKUS, is to be able to work very closely with our two partners and to be able to have more license-free exchange of data, equipment, technology, and intellectual property. So the way that we needed to do this was, and I thank everyone here for passing the NDAA, but also working very closely with the UK and Australia in the type of legislation that they also had to pass within their governments so that we can have the type of exchange and open license-free license-free equipment that we need. And as a result of the work that all three countries have put in the past few months, in a much more accelerated rate than normal, it normally takes 6 to 12 months to do something like this, if not longer, because we're talking about new legislation. We have been able to get to the point that we have these exemptions from ITAR that we want to come into force. But before we could do that, we needed to have an opportunity for industry to weigh in. So, because that's very important since they're going to be implementing it. So May 1st, as you said, we put that in the Federal Register. Right now, industry is commenting on that. We have, the U.S., the UK, and Australia have a team that's going to speak with industry in all three countries to answer any questions that they may have about it. And because it's going to open up so much more license-free capability amongst the three countries, it's going to be very important part of our working together on all the emerging technology aspects of AUKUS.
And this sounds like kind of a geeky discussion maybe to people watching, but I think America's greatest strength is our alliances. And I think it's the one thing that we have that our adversaries generally have not invested time in. They're starting to realize they're at a deficit. And so Russia, Iran, China, North Korea are trying to draw closer together because they see that the alliances that the U.S. and other democratic nations have is a powerful force multiplier. And so ITAR, we're throwing that around, but again, just for folks watching who may not know what it is, ITAR is a set of rules that is trying to protect U.S. intellectual property, especially in important defense areas, so that by sharing it too casually, we don't give away strategic advantages that we have. And yet, if we're going to be interoperable with our allies, there needs to be some sharing. And so part of the challenge, but it was a challenge I think we at least met in the first steps in the AUKUS legislation, was figuring out ways to build this framework, Australia, UK, US, where we can begin to share gaining exemptions from some of the ITAR prohibitions that in the past might have stopped us. And I think that's very important. And I'm assuming that in coming up with these rules with respect to AUKUS, the State Department is also thinking down the road, well, like in Pillar 2, we have other nations like Japan that have expressed interest in being part of Pillar 2. I was with the Canadian Defense Minister yesterday, and what a great partner Canada is, especially in the Arctic and in North America, but they're a Pacific nation as well. And so these template changes to open up exemptions from ITAR are not just about AUKUS, but I'm assuming that the State Department is doing them thinking down the road for the possibilities of other democratic allies working with us on important defense priorities. Am I right in making that assumption?
Yes, we actually in April, with all three countries, we're working very closely together, all three countries, on all of the discussions about new partners, have come up with some modalities, some ways forward, some considerations for new partners in Pillar 2. And so we are starting to consider consultations, and as you know, Japan has been one of the countries y'all going to have consultations with in terms of bringing them in. We haven't yet gotten to a decision yet about how we're going to work through that part of, in terms of ITAR, but certainly as we do these consultations and work with countries and consider finances, what kind of technology they have, in terms of what kind of protections they have already, these will be the things that we're going to be considering and taking very seriously.
Good, and I'll just say and conclude, it is important to get the AUKUS piece right before we prematurely add others in, and yet at the same time, I do think it's a good template for how we can become more interoperable with our allies, and if we craft the rules about AUKUS in such a way that we're mindful of the opportunities that others may want to join, then AUKUS will not only be good in and of itself, but I think it'll help us innovate down the road to keep the world safer. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Risch.
First of all, I want to follow up on Senator Kane's remarks. Let me say that up here, there are a number of us that think, I'll be very frank about it, you're being too tough on ITAR. ITAR is really, really important when you're trying to withhold secrets from Russia and China and others. But AUKUS is an outstanding enterprise. It's the NATO of the 21st century right now for the Indo-Pacific, and it's really important not only that we get this right, but that we craft it as rapidly as we can and craft it right. ITAR was put in place for a very good reason, but you know as well as I do that both of our allies, strong allies, Great Britain and Australia, are complaining about the fact that we're being too tough on the ITAR rules. They're partners, they're friends. If we're going to work together with them, they need to have access and flex. I think Senator Kane is right about expanding. If you want to talk about expanding, that's all well and good, but we got to get this thing up and running before we talk about expanding. And we also, as was pointed out, need to look forward to what we do with ITAR as we expand. But just because we flex or waive ITAR in certain circumstances with the two current allies doesn't mean we have to carry that forward when we admit somebody else. So I would urge you with all speed and haste to get through these ITAR issues, which seem to me to be stumbling blocks which don't need to be there. So thank you. Thank you, Senator Kane, for your remarks on that.
And Senator Risch, I agree with you. We have to get through the ITAR challenges. I must tell you there's two sides to that, and I've talked to both the Brits and the Australians about it, and they are making progress on their side as well. I think we got to have a meeting of the minds as quickly as possible on this, which requires some legislative change, and I think our allies understand that, and I hope that can be resolved quickly for the reasons that Senator Kane and Senator Risch have said. It's important that we move forward with the ability to advance the technologies in this area, and that requires a stronger information sharing and technology sharing among the three countries. The record of the committee will remain open till close of business tomorrow for questions that may be asked by members of the committee. Some have already indicated they plan to take advantage of that. We ask you to please respond to those questions as soon as possible. And there being no further business, the hearing will be adjourned.
Thank you.